I'm back. You're back. Great. Last time I kind of gave you a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going with this module. Both we're going to cover physical health, mental health, and we're starting with personality disorders. So let's do it, because that's what we're doing. So, okay, next slide. Sorry, that awkward lean. There's got to be. It's a little late to change the setup. Alright, we'll just deal with the reach. Alright, so personality disorders. I'm going to give you a definition here. They're patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors beyond the typical normal range of psychological variation. These tend to be kind of extreme levels. If we were to draw a bell curve, which maybe I will do. Otherwise, you'll just have to envision it. Yeah, there. Oh, this is awful. Hopefully I do some editing in post. But yeah, so these are kind of the extreme ends. You can think about this like a normal distribution and the tails. So some traits are just, so first of all, we've got just both extreme patterns of variation as well as just some traits are just not socially desirable. I struggle a lot with this with how I present neuroticism, which is experiencing negative emotion and emotional volatility. There's not a lot of positive things about having high levels of negative emotionality and being really volatile. There just isn't. And so that's probably why some of the biggest personality change literature has focused on how to reduce levels of neuroticism. No one tends to want to increase it. They just don't. But, let's back up. So some traits just in general are socially undesirable, but also extreme levels of desirable traits, like conscientiousness, is the hardworking and following the rules, but when you get into extreme levels of conscientiousness, where like every rule must be followed without doubt, no deviation at all, it's not a happy way to live. Like, flexibility is kind of important. But there's no exact point on the distribution where between like a normal personality and a disordered, I don't like to say abnormal, but there's not a magic cut point. It's not like a Z-score of 1.96. Above that is significant. Below that is not. Because it's a little bit of wiggle room. But typically when there's a characteristic pattern, that's when you get into kind of disordered personality land. Okay. So let's talk about this. So the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, came about in 1952. The first edition just included a list and a description of personality disorders as well as other psychological afflictions. There's been a lot of controversy in the DSM. As of the filming, the current edition is the 5th edition that came out right when I finished undergrad. And it ended up having just 2 systems of disorders, personality disorder, because we couldn't decide. So, but backing up again, I know I do this a lot. So the controversy here is just how to define the many things included in personality disorders. So like experienced clinicians versus researchers and empirical data have very different opinions on what a personality disorder is. And that came to a head in DSM-5. And we ended up with, we as in the field of psychology, ended up with 2 systems of personality disorders. And I'm going to talk about both systems. The official system, the one that is the approved DSM-5 version, is identical to DSM-4 revised, where you have a list of mental disorders and symptoms, and you just have to meet a certain criteria. versus under the new system, which is frankly more scientifically grounded. I know that you figured out by now I'm really bad at hiding my opinions. I like the appendix version. So that is the unofficial version, but that is what the personality researchers, so the people who research personality and most clinical psychologists align with the new system. While psychiatrists, it's not exactly this cut and dry, but it kind of feels like it. Psychiatrists really like the categorical system. And as you have learned in this class, and if you need a refresher on why categorical classification has problems, there's a video, which maybe I will link to right here or here or nowhere. It really depends on Mason's editing mood. Okay, so the new system isn't categorical. It doesn't classify you into bins of you have this personality disorder or that one if you meet the X number of criteria. Instead, it's more scientifically grounded, and the idea is looking at continuous traits. Now, I'll talk about both of these, but here's kind of the big story here. There's a debate, and there's strong disagreement of how to classify personality disorders. So, why do we even have this if this manual? Why? So, one, it's to make diagnosis more objective. Essentially, it's like having a rubric for where you have to meet objective criteria, or at least you've documented what those criteria are so that you can be consistent. In my class, for example, the rubric to grade the short answer questions is longer than the test. Test 1's rubric at the time of this filming was 17 or 18 pages, and Test 2's rubric is something like 22. It's a lot, just to make sure that we're grading is consistent. So a 8 out of 10 is the same for everybody. And so first of all, it makes it kind of objective and consistent. It also gives a consistent vocabulary. Now, this is not obviously for the test, but the idea is a rubric. Essentially, it's a rubric where you meet certain criteria. And so for beyond just making the diagnosis more objective, it ensures a common vocabulary for describing problems, which should make discussion and analysis more useful. We actually found this to be, we as in the field, for the big 5 personality traits, having that kind of common language on how to describe the big factors and how to synthesize previous research into that framework really allowed us to have a common language and to be able to synthesize all the literature. The same case happens here with the DSM. Prior to the DSM, just kind of, it was willy-nilly. It was vague. Hysterical. What did that mean? From the Greek, it means wandering uterus. Obviously, that is not what it means. Well, it means in any of the DSMs. But just having those definitions gives you some common ground, commonality. Just so you can all talk to each other in the same terms. Otherwise, when you've got literature that's emotional stability versus neuroticism, if you don't know that they are one is just the inverse of the other, those are just different things. That's the point I'm trying to make here anyway. I got more notes. Alright, so, and frankly, it just makes everything more useful. Now, this is, so it's especially important for research, so you can synthesize the literature and be able to draw on findings from other people who might use a different term. Alright, so secondly, and I know this is a little on the cynical side, but it's true, it's really important for insurance billing. So that insurance essentially like has to cover it because it's diagnosed as something objective. And so it can have a billing code. I know that's super cynical. I mean, obviously it's more than that. It's to kind of unify treatment and figure out what works so you can actually treat. Oh, come on. And so, but frankly, like, it's easier to get insurance to like approve your bill and pay and reimburse you for it when there's something they can point to as a disorder. It's harder for them to say no. This is kind of how it works in the United States. Anyway, so how do we do it? How do we define them? Just from a definitional standpoint, and we're going to start, and I'll kind of, so it's unusually extreme personality attributes in terms of cultural context, and it results in kind of a denial or distortion of reality. This cultural context piece is important because it has to be considered extreme in the environment they're in, because there's this bad habit of I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Kind of established Western professionals coming into a community and saying, "Oh, that's a disorder," where maybe it's normal. Kind of the classic. I mean, this isn't a personality disorder example per se, but up until at least DSM-3, like, homosexuality was considered a psychological disorder, and sure, and in some variants of the DSM, like the one in the Soviet Union or in Russia and China. Wow, Soviet Union. Wow, it's been a long week. But anyway, it has to be considered extreme within the context of their culture and environment, and not just like some clinician coming in and be like, "That's weird. That's extreme. Disorder for you. Disorder for you. Disorder for you." It has to be actually abnormal. It can't. That's the idea. Like, that's why that piece is there. And there has to be some denial or distortion of objective reality. People can be weird, and that's not a disorder. Unless there's some kind of distortion of the world around them. Maybe they just like their cats. That's fine. And there also have these unusual and extreme personality attributes have to be problematic. They have to have some it can't just be they're weird. There's got to be some distortion. It has to be weird within the context of this society, and it has to be problematic either to the person themselves, like, for example, maybe causing anxiety, depression, confusion, or for others around them. So, for example, like narcissistic personality disorder, that's more a problem for other people than for the person with that disorder. So it's got to be a problem for somebody. It can't just be they're a weird, quirky lady who's having fun with her green screen. Okay, so that's the idea. So, more definition-y stuff. So here's like the so here's what we mean by problematic. So, these personality disorders have to affect social relationships in some way. So often other people are required for many of the symptoms, like inflexible or deceitful, to be expressed. Now, these traits are just like regular or typical standard personality. These traits are stable over time. Personality disorders are about as stable as personality itself, which makes sense because, if anything, they can't be more stable than personality. These often begin kind of in adolescence or childhood, and they're difficult to change with therapy or really any other means. It can be done. Some personality disorders are more effective than others at treatment. Essentially, one of the big barriers, and frankly the most fundamental barrier, is personality disorders are egosyntonic. So that's so what that means is like the people who have the disorder don't see anything wrong. Now this only applies to some disorders, like borderline. It tends to not be egosyntonic. They often at least have some stress in their high levels of volatility. Not always. I had a run-in with a kind of a non-classic case of borderline. And, I'm not going to detail that here. Feel free to hit me up in office hours. I'm happy to dish there. Whew, it's exhausting. But, so it's not all of the disorders are egosyntonic, but in general, these symptoms are seen as just normal and just typical aspects to the person. So they think that it's on others, or like other people have the problem, not them. Okay. So, alright, here's the big split between the old section and the new section. Also, these are default icons. I don't know why it's an onion, but I love it. Alright, so old system. There were 10, and they were broken down into 3 clusters. You got cluster A, which is kind of characterized by like an odd and eclectic, eccentric pattern of thinking. So these are thinking or behavior. So these include, under the old system, paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. Alright, so that's cluster A. So cluster B, and also cluster B these tend to be the most stable, in general. They're characterized typically by dramatic, overly emotional, or unpredictable thinking or behavior. So these include antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm going to talk about the ones that are deleted, but like histrionic, deleted because it's super sexist. Oh my god, it's so sexist. Like, it's essentially like hysteria. It's like women losing control. Yeah. But we'll get there in a second. We're still talking about the old system, just so you know where we've been. Alright, cluster C. These are the like anxious and fearful thinking and behavior cluster. These include avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So those are the 3 clusters. Alright, that's old system, which is technically what we still use today in the DSM, but it's 10 major personality disorders plus, so broken into these 3 clusters, as well as kind of an 11th. It's like a grab bag of personality disorder not otherwise specified, where you have some kind of disorder that doesn't fit into the classic 10 buckets. Because, frankly, this is a problem with categorical clustering. Because people will have many of these characteristics, but not exactly fit the classic type, and so they get excluded, which is now why, like, personality disorder not otherwise specified is, like, the most frequent, I think, prevalent. It's the most popular disorder. Alright. New system. I have a list. So, 4 of the disorders under the new system have been deleted. There are no clusters in this system. Instead, it's characterized by 5 traits. So you can see where we're going to go with that one. Alright, so here are the 4 that are left, or that are removed. none of this. So schizoid personality disorder, gone. Histrionic, gone. Dependent, gone. Paranoid, gone. Okay. So these 4 were deleted because they were either not sufficiently coherent or common or distinct from the other disorders. Now, obviously, people who have been classified as this disorder in the past, it's not like they no longer have a personality disorder because theirs was deleted. No, what it means is that they still have extreme personality traits. It's just there's not like one classic profile for them. Because essentially they'd been like super unusual, and it was almost kind of whim which 10 were put in. Alright. So next time we're going to talk about these actual personality disorders. And, before I get too far back, let's actually... Okay, we're going to go back first. So there's one last big thing that I want to talk about. The 5 traits. So there are 5 traits, and they essentially map onto the big 5. I'll talk about them in a bit, but under the new system, it's continuous traits. No categories. I mean, there are disorders, but there's none of this cluster stuff. And yeah, so essentially they're called the bad, or Funder calls them the bad 5. That's not really a thing outside of Funder, but I kind of like it. It's cute. And these bad 5 correspond pretty closely to the big 5. Who would have thought? Most people would have thought eventually. It's just so. All right. So that's where we're going. So I will see you then.